how important is it to have box office success? I guess it's super important, right?
I mean, it's as important as from a business standpoint. It's the thing. It's the why of the movie. Thank God when we made it, we didn't really think about it in those terms, and so because you can't, right? If you think about like, oh, we're gonna make a decision that makes the movie make more money, then the movie makes less money.
No,
like
but
that, it's a direct relationship between those two. So you have to like make it as if no one's gonna see it, and then hopefully everyone sees it.
It's no secret that Warner Brothers is disappointed in how Batman vs Superman turned out, both critically and financially. It's a movie with terrible pacing, flat characters, and an insistence on focusing on future installments rather than the present film itself. But even as big of a disappointment it is for the studio, superhero movies aren't going away anytime soon. In fact, they're getting bigger. Avengers Infinity War is reported to have 67 characters featured in the movie, and DC's large superhero slate is getting built as quickly as possible. As these current universes continue to grow and start to border on overwhelming, it's beneficial to take a step back and revisit a truly great superhero movie. In a time before ever-growing cinematic universes, Pixar released The Incredibles, an immaculately crafted film made under the direction of the reliable Brad Bird that captures the spirit of comic books while still being a wholly original entity. Not only is the film fantastic and does a great job of balancing its large cast of characters, but all the things the film does right really highlights the issues in the modern climate of superhero films. Here's an obvious issue for you: the characters. This is less a criticism for Marvel's recent output, which do a decent job with setting up characters, and more towards other franchises such as Warner Brothers' DC Universe. One of the many flaws of Man of Steel is that for all the time we spend with Clark Kent, we don't really know much about him as a character. Clark barely changes throughout the film, struggling with the same issues of finding his place within humanity at the start of the film as he does at the end. However, within minutes of being introduced to our protagonist in The Incredibles, we know Bob Parr's desires, we know what kind of person he is, and more importantly, we know his flaws.
Fly home, buddy. I work alone.
As the movie goes on, we see how he faces and overcomes his fears, and by the end of the film, we can see how much he's changed as a person, and how he lets his family into his life rather than resisting them. Whereas a lot of the side characters in these Marvel and DC superhero films barely have personalities or an arc, with the only purpose being to look good or to be saved, The Incredibles puts great effort into making sure everyone is a rounded and fully realised character with a fulfilling arc. Violet gets over her insecurities and becomes confident, Dash embraces his powers, and Helen throws off the chains of being a stay-at-home mother and reclaims her own identity. Pixar has character arc and storytelling down to a science. It's hard to compete with them on that level for most films, let alone ones in the superhero genre. But what about something less fundamental, such as action sequences? Specifically the film's climaxes. One main complaint you'll often hear in films like Man of Steel is the amount of destruction that occurs on screen. The Incredibles is proof that you can still have your big, city-destroying battle climax, as long as there's some semblance of brevity. The problem with the climactic battles in films like Age of Ultron and Man of Steel is not the destruction porn in itself, or the sensory overload of too much going on screen at once, but the climaxes themselves simply just go on for too long. Scenes of superheroes duking it out should be exciting, but filmmakers feel the need to drag them out as long as possible to try and make them epic, but instead the sheer length of the scene just ends up making it a boring and empty spectacle. The big action set piece in The Incredibles, on the other hand, done in 10 minutes. Everyone gets an opportunity to have their powers shown off fairly, everyone feels useful. Spectacle in cinema isn't found in length, in fact it's often found in restraint, with some of the most spectacular scenes in film history only being seconds long. Tied into this, you don't have to go bigger to have bigger stakes. In movies like The Avengers with an ensemble of heroes, the only way they feel threatened is if there's an army of aliens or robots to take on. There's not much tension in the action when all your characters seem invincible. The Incredibles scales back for greater effect. A plane and some missiles is all that's in the way of life and death for Helen and her kids. If the missile hits, the plane blows up. There's a greater feeling of urgency and danger in this scene alone than there has been in the last few Marvel films. Another smart thing the film does is elegantly set up the stakes for the characters. In this scene, it both establishes the heroes have and will die, but it's also a great scene for showing how much danger Mr. Incredible's friends and family are in. But where I think The Incredibles really succeeds and where others fail is maintaining a consistent tone, both at its emotional core and on a visceral level of action and comedy. Marvel movies no doubt have their funny moments, good characters, and solid action, but it always feels like they have to pause one for another. It's why Age of Ultron felt a little tonally inconsistent for me. Specifically the character of Ultron. He feels like he was meant to be written as a threatening, menacing character, but when he keeps spouting weird-y lines that felt like they were written for Loki, it's hard to take him seriously.
I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to take this time to explain my evil plan.
Compare this to the Incredibles villain Syndrome. He's a genuine threat to the heroes, and while his motivations are undoubtedly heinous, it's a relatable one. Syndrome is a funny character. We don't laugh at him because of some witty dialogue, but it's because he's such a pathetic person, we can't help but laugh at his failings. The Incredibles expertly mix comedy, action, and pathos, all without its humour feeling unorganic or shoved in. Character and humour is shown through the action. There's no unnatural or out-of-character quipping, just because the writer couldn't resist putting it in the script. Even though The Incredibles is an animated film, because of this, it feels the most grounded. Don't get me wrong, in no way do I think these movies are bad, the opposite in fact. Marvel's output has been consistently satisfying, and I'm excited to see DC's singularly auteur-focused films and the possible direction they could throw themselves. But in comparison to The Incredibles, they lack humanity. Snyder's films are cold and distant, and while Civil War seems like a step in the right direction, Age of Ultron was seriously lacking in the development department. They're movies that you can enjoy watching at the cinemas, but for their balance of great character, satisfying action, and hilarious comedy, the superhero movie I'll always be going back to is The Incredibles.